we're here at CropConnect, the very first CropConnect. Just sat in on your presentation regarding sunflowers and choosing sunflowers potentially for this year, next year, and going on. Working in, good overview of the markets. I had no idea there were so many different types beyond just oil and confectionery. But you sort of framed the choice of choosing sunflowers in rotation based on some other factors that you don't always see on the balance sheet. So let's maybe go through a couple of those.
Sure. I think one of the biggest one is that looking at our nitrogen need and demand. It's nitrogen and fertilizers is a big number in our crop budget when we look at going into a situation. And so the first thing I do when I'm looking at a field is want to know that how much nitrogen is in the residual and how deep it is. If I'm looking at 60, 70 pounds of residual N because I'm coming off an over-fertilized wheat crop or a corn crop where we tend to have fairly high residual Ns, I think that favors putting sunflowers in that situation because it lowers that N cost that we generally associate in an average crop budget with charged against sunflowers. So
I know you also mentioned, which you didn't get into, but maybe we can a bit now, you like the option of a top dress, say, when they're about a foot tall. So how does that sort of factor into your fertility budget?
Sure, I think we can do some physiological changes to the sunflower plant to somewhat limit our disease potential, do some other things. I generally get really tall sunflowers, and so if I limit the N early on, there's some other reasons why I like a top dress. And so if I'm at 70 pounds residual, that's the perfect point. If I want to end up at 120 available per acre, that's a perfect spot to put the rest on with a top dress situation. And so I've got some equipment I can go on and top dress it that way. So if my sunflower crop, potentially is already in a situation where I don't have to worry about fertilizer, requirements up front, that maybe saves me a day in the springtime. And the value of a day in the spring depends on the spring we have.
Yeah, it could be worth a lot.
Right.
You also mentioned a couple factors in the rotation. So you've already mentioned rooting depth and maybe making up some of that nitrogen needs further down because of those big, deep roots. But also, of course, herbicide resistant or herbicide tolerant packages that you could rotate through, as well as some disease, and you mentioned soybean cyst nematode as well.
Right. There's a lot of reasons I think an individual situation doesn't always fit the average crop budget. And for me, I've got some fields with some rocks in them. Rolling them helps, but rolling doesn't get the rocks out of the field. And so if I'm cutting 3 feet high, taking sunflowers in, pretty good chance I'm not getting a rock in the combine. If I've got soybean cyst nematodes in a field, I can go to a resistant variety, but I can go to a resistant crop as well. I know that that's completely resistant. And so there's just a lot of other things to look at. If I've got resistant weeds coming in because I've used too much glyphosate in the rotation, a lot of the older chemistries that we need to probably be utilizing more, they're the ones we're using on sunflower right now.
Right, and now you also mentioned, and I think this is, you farm south of here, obviously, but certainly, for a lot of farmers, rough seeding conditions happen, I think, too often, but especially following corn. So you use the term that sunflowers become a great dance partner for corn. So we talked rooting depth, but also seed bed prep.
Yeah, there's a lot of times our corn doesn't come off the way we planned it in the spring. We make jokes about being 300-day maturing corn varieties because we don't get them off till March or April of the following spring. There's no great solution for what we're going to do to get a good crop off that field. And a lot of crops we look at in the rotation have a real penalty for late planting. We prefer planting our sunflowers timely like everything else. But if you've got a less than ideal situation, you do what you can with it. And a lot of times that's, I think, looking at sunflowers because they tolerate that later seeding better. If we've got a rough seed bed because we tried to do some spring tillage in a soil that really didn't deserve that, we can go a little bit deeper with the planter, know that the sunflowers are still going to come up. And if we get population variability in the field, sunflowers tolerate that fairly well also.
Okay, and then one last point, which I think, certainly this year is a great example of why contracts and some wording in certain contracts can really make a huge difference that you just don't see in the crop budget.
Absolutely. I think that act of God option that's in most sunflower contracts is very important. And just the idea to be contracted, having your price covered on at least a portion of your acres is very important. I think going forward, I'm not sure that we're in a downtrending market anymore. Hopefully we're down and we look at some recovery, but I want to have some of my price protection covered going forward. And an easy way to do that is with a production contract that has that act of God protection. We can do it on futures and do it with some other tools and some other crops, but this is sure an easy way to do it.
Great. Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you.